Hello and welcome to ACF Podcast with Brett Jones. Hello, Brett.
Mert, great to see you and wonderful to be on the podcast again.
Nice to have you. So, what do you want to talk about today?
I think we'll ballpark around two concepts. One is minimalism in training, and the other is kind of predominant styles or methods of strength training programming, and just kind of talk about where iron cardio would fit, into that.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So, when we talk about minimalism in exercise, what are we actually talking about?
So it's bringing a narrow focus to training. If one thing will get you 5, why do you do the other 4? Like it's just it's definitely looking to get maximum results from a targeted kind of focused program. When you look at traditional training approaches, and especially if you look or come from more of a general fitness or bodybuilding approach, you start hearing things about muscle confusion, and you hear about this idea that you need to switch exercises every 4 to 6 weeks, and so it gets pretty confusing for the person that's trying to develop a program. The idea that your body adapted to seated bicep curls, so now you have to stand up and do your bicep curls, is kind of one of these bodybuilding holdovers that sticks with us from a general fitness standpoint. And we start thinking, we need to hit all of these different angles, and there's upper fibers and lower fibers and middle fibers, and there's this angle and that angle, and like it's just kind of the traditional bodybuilding split and doing back and bis and shoulders and tris and chest and my brain doesn't even think that way anymore. Like I truly don't care. This is going to sound so weird. I don't care what muscle I'm hitting. I'm training. I'm training because I love to train. My physicality, my physical self is an important part of me. And I think we talked about it last time, kind of the mens sana and corpus sano sort of mindset, sound mind, sound body. So, being physically fit and strong has a lot of carryover and payoff into a lot of different things. And so, I don't even think muscles anymore. I don't think, I think patterns. And I focus on just getting the work done. It's from two different little concepts, and then I'll kind of circle back. Musicians are, and martial artists typically are people that understand the concept of practice. A musician is going to play their chords. You're always going to practice your chords, right? You're practicing how you can, in the best way, get the most perfect sound and execution of those chords with whatever instrument that you're playing. And you're going to do that forever. I quote a cellist whose name always escapes me, and then somebody writes it in the comments or whatever. And I've used it in articles, and I know the name, but I don't know the name. But he was asked at the age of 92 why he was still practicing. And he said, because I think I'm starting to make progress. So that's somebody that's 92 years old and still practicing the cello and this focus on practice and repetition. And we, for some reason, when we think about exercise, we tend not to bring that mindset with us. A martial artist is going to probably tie in pretty quickly to the concept of practicing your front kick. One of the most basic movements, and if it's a striking art, from a BJJ perspective, there's probably some other super basic first thing you ever learned thing that you're going to do and practice every time.
Shrimping.
Okay, shrimping. Okay.
You know what it is, right?
I don't.
Okay, it's just you lay on the ground and you just scoot your ass, like you completely lay on the ground and you scoot your ass sideways,
Got
and
it.
the other side and the other side,
Got it. Okay, so you're
like
practicing your hip
about a
shift.
four.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the hip shift for the being in the guard position. Um, that makes sense to me. Um, so there's these super basic things that when we step out of the exercise world, we know we're going to continue to practice those kind of forever, sort of as we're looking to gain greater skill
Mhm.
within the practice of an instrument or the practice of a martial art. But for some reason, when we get to exercise, we think, well, I've mastered that, or I've adapted to that, so now I have to do something different. And it's kind of like confusing to me because I've been working with Pavel for over 20 years now, and so the concept of strength as a skill and treating your training as a practice is hardwired into me at this point, and it's how I perceive and work on things. And what Pavel's done for 20 plus years is really promote this concept of a minimalist training approach. One of his first books, Power to the People, was the deadlift and the side press. That was it. And that was at a time when bodybuilding training was really popular. And here comes the anti-bodybuilding message
Yeah.
of you can do a very simple program daily, which was really anti-bodybuilding. And you can do the same two exercises 5 to 7 days a week and get very strong and accomplish your goals. Naked Warrior came out. That was the one-arm push-up in the pistol. Again, a body weight approach, but a very minimalist approach of two exercises. When he put out Quick and the Dead a couple of years ago, it was the main program, two arm swings and push-ups, or an even more minimalist program, snatches, or clean and jerk. And so Pavel has always tried to refine the training approach down to this minimalist approach of, what are the essentials? What are the things that I need to do? And through rotation of some different programming options, you can stay on the same, but different program for very long periods of time. So it's kind of this an anti variety. And that's, we were talking quickly before the call about some different concepts and, the impact that the MTV launching had on the older generation at that time. I was 10 years old when MTV launched, 52 now. And, to my parents, the look of MTV, the bright colors, the quick transitions, you said even like made some people like physically ill because it was just so different visually. And now I think TikTok, that's our TikTok, right? The kids that are growing up TikTok, and they're used to scrolling through this feed. And I know some of the statistics from looking at some of the marketing and app sort of stuff. You have less than 3 seconds to capture somebody's attention on something like Instagram or TikTok. Like people are just scrolling. So that's kind of the anti focus, the anti-minimalist sort of approach. And so we have a generation or generations that are coming up now. I still don't think of myself as a Gen Xer, but I guess I am from a date standpoint. I'm definitely a Gen Xer, and then so anyway, that's a totally different conversation.
Yeah, but I never thought of Gen Xer as as you either.
Yeah, I feel like a boomer, but a little more of a Gen Xer. So this minimalist approach can be really confusing to folks. And what am I missing? Well, nothing. Are there some gaps that you need to fill? Sure. There's, when you're doing a really minimalist routine, and let's use iron cardio as an example, clean press squat. Let's just focus on the most classic version. And maybe we're doing traveling twos. Maybe we were doing double bells, clean press squat, or double bell traveling twos. So we got 4 options there. And I would argue that you could take that routine with different weights done for different volumes, and you could run that for a long time. And really you'd have great variation within a kind of a set minimalist routine, and you're going to clean, you're going to press, you're going to squat. And now what are a couple of potential gaps that we would want to fill in there? Maybe we need a little more direct back training for a little bit of shoring up some scapular strength and the lats. So maybe we plug in pull-ups to a couple of sessions in a week. Maybe we add in a 1-arm row just to kind of shore up and kind of work on that more specific kind of back scapular strength. Single leg stance. So we get in some single leg deadlifts, airborne lunge. We plug in just a couple of things that I know I'm not getting any single leg work in the iron cardio that we talked about. So having some get-ups, having some single leg deadlift in the warm-up or preparation for the iron cardio session, it plugs that gap, right? So there's a couple things to be aware of when you really go minimalist. There will be a couple gaps that you need to fill, kind of, depending on what you're looking to do and push on. So that kind of approach you can do for an extremely long time, especially if you're plugging a couple of those gaps. So the fear of a minimalist routine, just buy in and do it for a while, right? And that's the biggest thing.
I'm gonna give you an argument from the other side and saying that, okay, so I've been using iron cardio and I've done starting strength, 5x5, other and modified versions of that. So I ran very minimalist programs most of my training. However, I was also doing other stuff that is not training, like wakeboarding, snowboarding, like climbing, jujitsu. Well, it is training, but still. But I was doing other stuff, or like I was living in a camp in the mountain. And I was like hiking all day, like living in a forest, basically. So, but I think that filled gaps in my training by itself. But when you're completely sedentary, like I am right now, I'm locked into this chair and I work all day, and whatever training I do is good. But I feel like I'm not as, like, if I was doing iron cardio and I was living outdoors, like not in a house, but like without the roof over my head, it would be a very fit person. But now I think it's just giving me enough to be able to do other things. But yeah, some gaps need to be plugged, perhaps.
I agree. So that's, the interesting thing is, we talked about it last podcast, that fitness has become our martial art, right? It's become this thing that we're focused on. Instead of using fitness and strength to serve your life, we kind of serve our life to fitness and our exercise routines. Whereas for somebody like you that wants to wakeboard, that wants to hike, that wants to, go do these other things, your fitness just supports that. And life is going to vary, right? Right now work is being prioritized. Things are busy. I get that. And then there'll come a time where you'll be able to really kind of get back into those things and enjoy some time outdoors. So, maintaining that fitness base and using a minimalist program like iron cardio to keep that fitness base established will allow you to go do those things and not have as much of like a break-in or adjustment period when you do get back to those things. So yeah, I like hiking. For myself, I don't I don't have a lot of other pursuits right now. So yeah, it's kind of like work all day and, on the weekend, try to get out for a hike, or maybe during the week, I'm able to sneak out around the neighborhood and do an urban hike, to keep that aspect of things going. We're headed into winter here. I know hikers will say there's no such thing as bad weather. There's just bad clothing. Okay. I think there's bad weather. So I have an elliptical. And so what I'll start doing during the winter is I'll go down and do 30 to 45 minutes on the elliptical, listen to a podcast or ebook, and fill in the gap with some low level zone 2 cardio. And a lot of, the internet, a lot of people now saying, oh, nobody understands zone 2. And the only way to know is to, buy a $250 lactate meter and poke your finger during your exercise and measure your lactate while you're exercising. It's like, we can't get people to get off the couch and do 20 minutes of exercise. You want them to now buy a $250 meter and try to measure their lactate during exercise. Like, just nasal breathing. If you can maintain nasal breathing, you're probably in a good below your lactate threshold sort of exercise. Some people can mentally and physically handle the stress of nasal breathing above that, but that's not most people. That's a pretty rare group of individuals, actually. So yeah, filling in the gap of that kind of zone 2 sort of cardio base. And there's other things. If you want to be an explosive athlete, and like, let's use something simple. You want to play golf, you want to play tennis, like part of your training should be some sort of power based approach. Med ball slams, med ball tosses, some sort of bounding and jumping that's going to support I hate to even say this, but we're just going to put quotations marks around it and say some sort of plyometric training. That could be a whole other podcast to talk about.
Okay.
Plyometric training. But so yeah, there are, the minimalist routine is your base. Where do you want to go from that base? So that's the question that an individual would need to answer kind of for themselves.
So yeah, that's a very good point to make. I think it gives you a foundation to build other stuff on.
Yep. According
to your needs. And you would say it writes behind you strong first, and you always mention strength. So that foundation is strength for you, yep. Right?
Absolutely. It's the foundational physical quality. Now, I prioritize movement quality first, and strength. They're on the same level, but movement quality first. Build your strength on that movement quality base, and then then power training, and then understanding the conditioning phase. So there's kind of 4 to 5 basics that make up my sort of exercise philosophy. Movement quality matters, strength is a priority, power training matters, and then understanding this concept of conditioning and the anti-glycolytic approach that Pavel has been promoting and building. And with those 4 basic building blocks, I can pretty much look at anybody's routine and kind of understand, what's going on in it. And from that strength training standpoint, the other thing we were going to kind of talk about a little bit was some different strength training approaches and programming approaches. You hear a lot of different things out there. And for the moment, I want to set hypertrophy training to the side.
Okay.
That is a dark rabbit hole. We've been trying to understand hypertrophy for decades, and we still don't fully understand hypertrophy. We know there's chemical, neurological, and mechanical aspects to hypertrophy, and I think if you get too far down that rabbit hole, it's a very confusing place to be, can be.
Mhm.
Oddly enough, if you ignore it and accumulate enough volume and use some of these other programming approaches, I think the hypertrophy will take care of itself. Now, is that the conversation for somebody who wants to be a heavyweight bodybuilder? No.
No.
You're going to approach things differently and dietary differently, and there's so let's set hypertrophy to the side.
I want to make a note that to build crazy amounts of muscle with very low body fat percentages and looking like the solarium tanned version of the Hulk, you would need to take basically the hormones of a racehorse into you.
Yeah, there's some supplementation that gets involved, right? It's definitely a different approach. So we'll kind of set that to the side for just the moment and focus on some classic strength training approaches. And so when we look at that, there's 4 types of strength training programming or cycling that get involved. One is linear, and linear programming is just like it sounds. It's a classic American powerlifting approach, and the simplest way to think of it is you are going to compete on date X, and for a more experienced lifter, you're going to say, I want a 3% PR.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm already, let's just, and I'm making up numbers here. Let's say I'm a 500-pound squatter.
Mm-hmm.
Making a 3% gain on 500 pounds is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
Maybe you're in the 3 to 5% range, but ballpark 3%. So maybe 3% is your second lift, and 5% over your current max is your third attempt. So really big PR. So we lay those numbers out, and then we count backwards, and we subtract 2 to 3% off of each of those weeks. And we end up at our starting point, and we have a very kind of linear progression in intensity. And we are defining intensity as percent of 1RM, not confusing intensity and effort.
Mm-hmm.
Most training programs focus on effort equaling intensity. That is not the case. Intensity is a percent of 1RM or a percent of repetition max. Effort, how hard you work, is independent of that. That's a separate thing. Okay.
You
so
can
if I build
% RM, but you can do hundreds of reps, and that would drive one of the parameters up, but the other one down, right?
Well, let's say that I set a yes, but let's say I set a 5x5 PR. That's going to be a high effort, but I'm still going to be at 85% of my 1RM. So from an intensity standpoint, it's not super high intensity, but effort wise, it's going to be really high. Now I go up and do 2 sets of 2 at 90%. My intensity is high. Effort's actually going to be fairly low. That's not a super effort intense day. So it's variables that we need to unplug, and the reason we have to unplug them, especially here in the States, is this concept of high intensity training has kind of taken over everything. You know, if you're not ready to grab the puke bucket at the end of a set or a workout, you didn't work hard enough. Which is silly, but anyway. So linear program is just what it sounds like. It's going to be very linear in intensity. The other thing that happens there, and this is in very traditional approaches, intensity and volume have an inverse relationship. So if I'm building my intensity, I'm dropping my volume. If I'm building my volume, I'm dropping my intensity. Those two things become coupled in an inverse fashion. So as I've got this linear approach towards the intensity, building towards that new PR, 1RM, I have an inverse relationship with that volume. So I may start higher volume. We'll make volume my my left hand, and intensity my right hand. So I may start with a higher volume and lower intensity, and then linearly move those things. So I build towards that high intensity, and I know my volume is going to drop. One other thing to mention here, like operating at 90+% of 1RM is something that makes up maybe 10% of your program. It's not something you do very often. You can have basically 3 higher intensity efforts every 2 weeks. It's just how the neurological system and just how your body handles that sort of intense work. And notice I said intense in terms of the definition of percent of 1RM or percent repetition max, not effort. So that's linear programming kind of in a nutshell. Another popular approach is step cycling. So, and this one has some real benefits to it. So step cycling is you're going to work at a particular weight for a period of time. Then you're going to jump that weight, work there for a period of time, jump that weight, work there for a period of time, jump that weight, work there. So one of the things that happens in a lot of traditional training approaches is we don't get a good stabilization of the effort. So we think as soon as we're able to do X 5x5, add a new weight, well, I should add weight so that I can do a new 5x5 and then add weight. Well, gains that are brought about quickly are lost quickly. So, and this is a question that we get all the time because a traditional set of kettlebells, 16, 24, 32 kilo, there's some big gaps between those weights, right? And people, I want to micro load and I want to go up 1 pound at a time. And, well, the wisdom in having these big gaps is you're going to spend, let's say you're making that transition from pressing the 24 to pressing the 32. The time you will spend accruing volume, practice, and skill at the 24 will stabilize your strength results in a way that once you get to the 32, you're better able to practice that, and your strength gains will be more stable. If I go 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, if I go a kilo at a time and I kind of quickly make that transition to the 32, those strength gains are not as stable. And so the step training approach, step cycling, does have a lot of benefit to it. And so I may go up in intensity and stay there for a while. At the same time, I'm building a little bit of volume at that same weight. Then I jump the weight, and my verbiage there is on purpose. Jump the weight. I'm not going from 24 kilo to 25 kilo. It's 24 to 28. 28 to 32. Or 24 to 32. Like it's a jump. Then I'm going to stay there. So once I make the jump in weight, I'll typically decrease my volume, work at that weight, and add volume before I make the next jump. So really, really good way to program your strength training. The other would be wave cycling, and wave cycling is kind of just what it sounds like. You're going to wave up to a certain weight, and then you're going to take a couple steps down. So it's the 3 steps forward, 2 steps back approach, right? So you're going to wave up for a period of time, and then you're going to go back down higher than where you started. So you're not going back to the beginning. And then you want that next wave to take you a little bit higher. And then you're going to take those 2 steps back, which is higher than you started the second time. And then you're going to wave those up 2 steps. So you continually wave the weights. And so there's a lot of benefit to approaching your strength training programming from that wave cycling approach. And the last one is variable loading. So this is what Plan Strong and built Plan Strong by Pavel Built Strong by Fabio and Pavel, is focused on. And so within variable loading, we're actually all over the place. So linear, we're on that straight line. Step, we're making our steps. Waves, we're waving. Variable loading, we have uncoupled intensity and volume.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about in those traditional approaches, those that are coupled and have an inverse relationship.
Mm-hmm.
In variable loading, we break that coupling. You can have high intensity, high volume, low intensity, low volume, and every permutation in between. So those two things become separate variables. When you look at some very successful and looking at, say, the Soviets in their Olympic lifting dominance. And the interesting thing about the Soviet approach versus the Bulgarian approach is the longevity of the athletes within the Soviet approach. You had people that won multiple medals over multiple Olympic cycles, whereas typically with a lot of the Bulgarian approaches, they would win a medal at one Olympic cycle. Maybe had a couple athletes that were able to go through two, but within the Russian approach, you had multiple athletes that won multiple medals over multiple Olympic cycles. So you're talking about decades long careers, not 4 to 8 year careers. So massive difference. And what they did was uncouple intensity and volume and have this very varied variable loading approach to what they were doing. The intensity would ballpark around 70 to 85% was where you would do most of your work. You would visit the higher ranges, that 10% of your work. You would visit the lower ranges, but that's typically practice and warm up, so to speak. But the bulk of the work would be done in that 70 to 85% of one rep range. And so that variable loading approach, granted, more complicated from a program design standpoint. You have to understand the algorithms and the formulas and put it together. Fabio just put out a plan at the recent Programming Demystified workshop where he uses a die roll to set those sort of variable loading parameters. So you don't have to do the math. You roll the die and do your program. So those four approaches give a lifetime of programming options. And it's not to say that while I would say the variable loading approach has a little bit more maybe longevity to it. Linear, step, and wave cycling are absolutely things that you would want to plug into your training program. From an iron cardio standpoint, we're kind of blurring the lines a little bit. It's kind of variable loading. You could use step. You could wave if you're working your time frames or your weight ladders and things like that. You can wave. Like it kind of, you can fit those approaches into there.
But essentially, it allows you to have low intensity, low volume, and high intensity, high volume training sessions. So we can easily say that it definitely fits the variable loading, even though it can't the other ones.
Absolutely. And I think also, even though, and this is going to sound weird, when you really drill down on linear, step, wave, and variable, we're looking at that from a more pure strength training programming approach. Conditioning is something different. And that's and iron cardio kind of walks the line between the worlds. But Pavel's new book, Kettlebell Axe, is definitely one that everybody should get and read to better understand the anti-glycolytic training approach. And so maybe next time we on the next podcast, we kind of drill down a little bit more into the conditioning end of things and chat about that, because
for sure there's a lot of interesting things that happen metabolically, changing the the processing of oxygen and producing energy in our bodies when you do that. But also strength is, since we both, I think, believe that strength is the foundational quality for fitness. Perhaps we can talk about this first. So what I want to ask you is, how are these approaches maybe fit people at different stages of strength training? So
Yeah.
linear approach perhaps is linear and step approach are quite similar, I think, but step approach is where you cannot practically do a linear approach because there are jumps in like the kettlebells you said. And also I think the people that are thinking about micro loading kettlebells with like small weights, they come from probably a barbell world where it makes sense to do that, but it doesn't really translate anymore. So I think those first two really fit the beginners because it gets them up to a certain level of strength really fast. But there are also some downfalls after they get to a really strong, too strong for their own good at times when they first begin in the first 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and hopefully in working with a coach, you kind of avoid, some of the pitfalls that you can run into. I think that when we look at a very, very new beginner, so somebody that doesn't have a 1RM, or somebody that it's a bad idea to try to set a 1RM, because there's risk in setting a 1RM. So the training approaches there, I think Fabio's reload program becomes a really good one to look at from that standpoint. And you set a sorta rep max for a set of 5 at a particular weight. And here's where like people get they let better be the enemy of good. And I don't know if you've ever heard that saying, but I'm so worried about getting things just right that I never really enact the plan.
Yeah.
A sort of rep max works to get you started. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to practice the strength training program for X period of time, and maybe you find out you started too low. Okay. What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, right? So getting a very, very beginning person started means you're going to approach the training from a different perspective. I think step cycling really works there because you're going to stay at a certain weight in practice. The linear approach can work as well. You just have to control your jumps and look at where you're taking that program over 8 to 12 week, ballpark 8-week time frame. So a couple of differences there in getting started with a really, really true beginner. As you begin to be able to set some 1RMs or estimate your 1RM, and Fabio has a great way to do this that he unveiled at Programming Demystified versus those 1RM charts where you did 3 reps with X, so your max should be Q. I was able to hit 515 for a double in my squat, but my max squat was 518. If you look at the charts, somebody that can do 515 for a double would be squatting, a lot more than that. So I've always been able to operate at a very high percentage of my 1RM, but for very low reps. So for future conversation, the complexities of some of the strength training responses and individual variations. But
I read some research about that, and somehow that is tied to the efficiency of your motor cortex in the way that if you have a very efficient motor cortex, you're going to be able to operate at near your 1RM max more easily, thus making those charts kind of skewed towards like more volume-based approaches.
Well, and there's that would be the neurological end of things. So from the mechanical end of things, your structure supports operating at those higher percentages. from a metabolic standpoint, the energy production within those areas, mitochondrial efficiency, you might end up being a low rep person at a certain, let's say 80% 1RM. You might only be able to get a few reps because of local muscular endurance issues. You just don't have the mitochondrial efficiency to be able to keep producing energy in a low oxygen environment, like when you're performing a set of bench press or squat or whatever the case may be. So there's multiple aspects there, but yeah, the neural aspect is definitely that's pretty high on the list for why you might have a different response or a different capacity at something like 80% 1RM.
That's a very interesting point. So you say that all of these approaches can work for a beginner as long as it's put together by a competent coach.
I think so, and you have to be willing, as the person that's putting it into practice, you have to be willing to kind of obey the stop signs. Tempo changes, rep speed drops. There's 3 to 5 different things that we look for that tell us, hey, you should stop this set, or you're actually starting you're maxed and you need to restart the program. And that's where hopefully in working with a coach, you've got somebody that's going to help you with that. I think because of the high intensity approach, we tend to approach things from that going to failure. And notice none of my strength training advice or programming conversation here involved going to failure.
No.
Dr. Fred Hatfield years ago quipped, I don't train to failure, I train to success. And the train to failure approach is literally training to fail. And I was a one set to failure hit Jedi many years ago. I've read my Mike Menser and Arthur Jones and all of the one set to failure stuff. The thing they're shooting for is maximum stimulation of the muscle fiber. They feel like that is the holy grail of hypertrophy. Well, A, what if I don't care about hypertrophy? And B, that's not the primary thing that causes hypertrophy. So the approach kind of crumbles because the center seed of truth. Now, have there been people that were successful with a one set to failure approach? Yes, with caveats. It typically wasn't just a one set to failure sort of training program, and there was supplementation involved that made that a little more successful. So I would just advise, and people give, well, I'm going to show how tough I am by taking a set to failure. Yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Are there other areas where you can push and have these more effort intense workouts? Sure. For strength training, building max strength, training to failure is not productive.
Because training to failure actually involves losing enough neural drive to be able to control your muscles and losing the required energy in your muscles to be able to control them efficiently. So at that point, anything can happen. If not anything can happen, but at bad times, things can happen that can set you back for months or years. Injuries can happen.
And you're building a less efficient neurological system that is built to fail. You're just convincing your neurological system that when you do the X, the idea is to fail. So it actually becomes easier to fail.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You can also imagine people would maybe you can do 6 reps, but at 5 you want to fail because the 6th one is gonna suck. So maybe you can just start
Pavel and Fabio call that training to refusal.
That's a good one.
Not to failure. So yeah. All right. Well, Mert, it's been a good conversation today, and I think we covered a couple of really important concepts with minimalism. Don't be afraid of focusing on 2 or 3 exercises, and your movement prep and your ground-based movement warm-up and the outside activities are going to add a lot of variability to your movement. So don't worry about having a narrow focus. Bring that musician or martial arts practice mindset to your training. and then kind of a better understanding of some of these basic strength training programming approaches, frames a really good conversation. So I thank you.
Thanks a lot for the conversation. It was really interesting, and there is tons of more stuff I wanted to ask you. But if we go on tangents, I think we can go on tangents and tangents, and keep talking for days.
For the next
so
podcast.
looking forward to the next one. So it was really nice talking to you, Brett. So see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Mert.